41 motorcycles shook the windows of Ruthie's diner like a slow-rolling earthquake that wouldn't quit. The engines didn't roar all at once. They came in waves. First 5, then 8, then the rest filling the gravel lot until there wasn't a square foot of space that didn't belong to chrome or leather or dust kicked up from the county road. The diner sat alone on Route 9 halfway between nowhere and the Kentucky state line, the kind of place where the coffee was always burnt and the pie was always good, and nobody ever came in groups larger than 4 until today. Ruthie Calder stood behind the counter with a phone already half pulled from under the register, watching through the front glass as men and women swung legs off saddles and stretched road-stiff backs and walked toward her door like a slow tide she couldn't stop. Leather vests, road dust, faces that didn't smile for strangers. The bell above the door rang 41 times. They filled every booth, every stool, pushed tables together, until the long center of the diner looked like a banquet hall for people who ate with their elbows on the table and didn't apologize for it. Ruthie's hand stayed near the phone, not dialing, just ready. The man who sat at the head of the long table didn't ask for a menu. He didn't need to. He was the kind of man restaurants noticed before he opened his mouth. Mid-40s wide across the shoulders, a beard going silver at the jaw, hands that looked like they'd built things and broken things in equal measure. His vest carried patches older than some of the riders with him, and when he sat, the others settled like the room had found its center of gravity. Jed Holden. They called him Bear, and the name fit in the way nicknames only fit when nobody remembers choosing them. He ordered coffee. Black. The woman beside him, Jolene Voss, ordered the same. She was lean, where he was broad, sharp, where he was still her eyes moving across the room like she was cataloging exits and threats in the location of every fork on every table. The grill hissed. Plates clattered. Conversations started low and stayed low because bikers in a diner didn't need to be loud. They'd already made their noise outside. That's when the boy walked in. Not through the front door with the bell, through the side entrance near the restrooms, the one that didn't lock properly and let cold air leak in during winter. He slipped through the gap like he'd practiced being small and stepped into the dining room with the confidence of someone who had exactly one plan and no backup. He was 6 years old. His hoodie was gray and too thin for February in Kentucky. The zipper was broken halfway up, held together with a safety pin that had already started to bend. His sneakers were wet from the road, the soles peeling at the toe, and his cheeks were chapped red from cold that had been sitting on his skin for longer than one walk. He walked straight to the biggest table. 41 bikers watched a child cross the floor like he was approaching a throne, and not one of them moved. Not because they didn't care, because they didn't understand yet. The boy stopped at the edge of the table right in front of Jed Holden and opened his small fist. Coins scattered across the wood. Quarters, dimes, nickels, a few pennies that rolled and wobbled and caught the overhead light before settling. The boy looked up at the biggest man in the room with eyes that were too steady for his age and said 5 words that stopped. The grill stopped, the coffee stopped, the air itself. Is that enough for soup? Jed didn't answer right away. He looked at the coins first. Then at the boy's hands, red-knuckled, trembling, slightly not from fear, but from cold that had been there so long, it became part of how his fingers worked. Then at the boy's wrist, where a paper band wrapped tight, the kind hospitals snap on in the emergency room. Bright white. Today's date printed in black. And a last name in block letters that Jed read once, then read again, then felt something tighten behind his ribs that he couldn't explain and didn't try to. The name on the wristband said Marrow. Jed's eyes stayed on it for 1 second too long. Then he slid the coins back toward the child, carefully like they were made of glass. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice was low, the kind of low that didn't scare children because it sounded like the ground. "Colton. How old are you, Colton?" "6. You here by yourself?" Colton nodded once, then corrected himself quickly, the way kids do when they remember a rule. "My mom's here. She just can't get up." Joe's coffee cup paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down without drinking. A chair shifted somewhere at the table. Not aggressive, alert. 41 people didn't ride together without learning how fast a room could change, and the room had just changed. Jed kept his eyes on the boy. "Where's your mom?" Colton's gaze flicked to the window and back like the answer was outside and he didn't want it to be. He tugged at his sleeve, pulling it over the wristband, and the motion was practiced. He'd done it before. He'd done it enough times that his fingers knew where to grab without looking. Sunrise Motel, Colton whispered. Room 12, by the ice machine. Is she sick? Colton nodded. She's hot. She says she's fine. He paused. His jaw tightened in a way that didn't belong on a 6-year-old's face. She's not fine. Jed looked at Ruthie behind the counter. What's the cheapest soup? Ruthie's hands had come off the phone. She was watching the boy the way women watch children who remind them of something they don't want to name. Chicken noodle, she said, cups $3.50. Colton flinched at the number. His hands shot to the coins and started pulling them back into his fist, counting by touch, already knowing the math was wrong. I can get more, he said fast. I can find more. I can check the bar. Jed's palm came down over the coins, not slamming, covering, stopping them from scattering, and stopping the boy from having to count what he already knew wasn't enough. You don't have to, Jed said. He reached into his vest, pulled a 20 from the inside pocket, and laid it flat on the table. 2 bowls, he said to Ruthie. 1 here, 1 to go. Extra crackers. Ruthie nodded once and turned toward the kitchen fast, like she needed the wall between her and the dining room, before her face did something she couldn't take back. Colton didn't sit down. He stood at the edge of the table with his hands at his sides, eyes moving across the patches on vests, the heavy boots under the table, the hands wrapped around coffee cups. Big hands, hands that could be kind of cruel, and he'd learned not to assume which, Jed noticed. He leaned down slightly, bringing his face closer to Colton's level without crowding him. The way you approach a dog that's been hit before. Slow, sideways, no sudden moves. Why'd your mom leave the hospital? Jed asked. Colton swallowed. They said money. The soup arrived. Ruthie set the bowl in front of Colton and slid a paper bag folded tight around the second portion toward the edge of the table. Steam rose from both, and the smell of chicken broth filled the space between them like something warm trying to fix something broken. Colton stared at the bowl like it was something that could vanish if he looked away. He picked up the spoon with both hands, brought it to his mouth, and took 1 sip. His shoulders dropped. Not a lot, 1/2 inch, maybe less. But Jed saw it, and Joe saw it, and Ruthie behind the counter saw it from 15 feet away. It wasn't pleasure. Relief, the boy's body releasing something it had been holding since before he walked through that side door. Relief was what broke Jed the most, because relief meant the boy hadn't been sure he would eat today. Colton ate half the bowl, fast, mechanical, the way people eat when they've learned that food doesn't always wait. Then he reached for the paper bag and pulled it against his chest like someone might grab it. That's for your mom, Jed said. Colton nodded hard. Thank you. When you bring that back, Jed said carefully, watching the boy's face. Does Mike get mad? The name landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Colton's throat bobbed. He tried to smile, and the smile failed before it reached his cheeks. I'll say Ruthie gave it. Ruthie's eyes flashed with something hot and immediate. Sweetheart. Colton cut her off urgent, his voice dropping to the kind of whisper children use when they're protecting adults from information that could make things worse. He won't yell at Ruthie. He'll yell at me. The words didn't land loud. They landed heavy. A whole diner heard them anyway. The grill, the coffee maker, the men and women at the long table whose hands had gone still around cups and forks and napkins. Every sound in Ruthie's diner dropped to nothing, and in that nothing, a 6-year-old boy stood holding a bag of soup he wasn't planning to eat because his mother needed it more. Jed's gaze went back to the wristband. Marrow. He felt the name settle somewhere deep, not in his memory, but in his chest, in the place where promises lived, long after the people who asked for them were gone. Colton, Jed said, and his voice had changed. Not louder, not softer. Harder the way metal gets harder when you heat it and let it cool. Walk straight back to your mom. Don't stop. Don't talk to anybody. You go to her. Colton nodded, eyes wide. Jed added, quieter now. If anyone tries to take that soup from you, you come right back here. Understand? Colton nodded again, faster, like he was terrified of getting the answer wrong. Ruthie reached across the counter and squeezed his shoulder. Be safe, baby. He hopped down from where he'd been half standing against the table edge, pushed the side door open, and cold air flooded in. The door swung shut behind him, and the bell over the front entrance rang even though nobody used it, just the wind catching the metal, a bright sound and sudden silence. Through the front window, Jed watched the boy cross the road. Small against the gray afternoon, the paper bag hugged to his chest, his wet sneakers slapping pavement. Then Jed saw the patrol car. It had been parked across the street the entire time. Engine running, lights off, angled toward the diner like it wanted a clear view of every window and every door. Someone sat inside watching, waiting. Colton was barely 10 steps past the curb when the patrol car door opened. The man who got out moved like time belonged to him. Early 30s, clean uniform pressed sharp enough to cut. A jaw that could sell toothpaste and eyes that could sell lies. He crossed the street toward the diner with a walk that said he'd done this before, walked into places he didn't own, and made them feel like his. The bell rang when he came through the door. Deputy Wade Sutter scanned the room the way a man scans a room when he wants everyone to know he's scanning it. His gaze moved from booth to booth, from vest to vest, from face to face, and then settled on the long table like he'd been expecting it. "That's a lot of motorcycles for one little diner," he said. Easy voice, friendly voice. The kind of voice that made you check your wallet after he left. Jed stood, hands visible, flat on the table. "We're eating." Sutter's eyes flicked to the empty seat where Colton had been then, to the window where the boy's small figure was still visible, shrinking into the distance. "Kid just left." "He asked for soup," Jed said. Sutter tilted his head like he was filing something away. "That boy's under my watch. His mom's complicated. And Mike doesn't like strangers getting involved." Joe's coffee cup was in her hand again, but she wasn't drinking. She was holding it like a prop, something to keep her fingers busy while her mind worked. At the end of the table, a man named Brick shifted his weight forward half an inch. Another named Coyote set his fork down without sound. Jed kept his voice flat. "Mike who?" Sutter's jaw tightened for one beat. "Mike, that's all you need." He glanced at Ruthie behind the counter. "You okay, Ruthie?" Ruthie swallowed. "I'm fine, Deputy." Sutter looked back at Jed. "Here's how this works. You pass through, you spend your money, you leave. You don't follow kids to motels. You don't knock on doors. You don't make my day messy." Jed didn't move. "If a 6-year-old is counting change for soup, your day is already messy." Something shifted behind Sutter's eyes. Not the expression on his face, which stayed pleasant and composed, but the thing underneath it, the mechanism that chose which face to wear. For half a second, the wrong one showed. Then it was gone, replaced by warmth so practiced it could pass for real. "You don't know that woman," Sutter said softly. "You don't know what she does when she needs something." "I know she's sick," Jed replied. Sutter shrugged. "People get sick. People still make choices." He leaned forward just enough that Jed could feel the badge without being touched by it. "Don't follow him." "Why?" "Because I said so." And this time there was nothing warm in it at all. For a long second, the diner was a pressure cooker. Two men standing in a room full of people who knew exactly what was happening and couldn't name it without starting something that wouldn't stop. Then Sutter stepped back, adjusted the radio on his belt like a man straightening a cufflink, and raised his voice for the room. "Enjoy your lunch. Keep it peaceful." He walked out. The bell jingled, and as the door closed, a woman sitting in the far corner booth stood and left through the side entrance without a sound. She hadn't ordered food. Her black coffee sat untouched. She moved like she didn't want her face remembered, and by the time anyone thought to look twice, she was gone. Ruthie leaned over the counter, voice shaking. "He's going to take it out on that kid." Jed was already reaching for his jacket. "That's why we're going." He dropped cash on the table without counting it. "2 bikes only," he said to the table. "Quiet. No pack." Joe was already standing. Brick looked like he wanted to argue and didn't. The rest stayed seated, eyes tracking Jed as he moved toward the door, carrying the whole room's restraint on his shoulders like a weight he'd volunteered for. Outside, the cold hit like a wall. Jed headed for his bike, but didn't start it right away. Across the road, Deputy Sutter's patrol car sat idling. Sutter was inside, one hand on the wheel, eyes on the mirrors. He didn't drive off. He wanted them to move first. Jed waited through one long breath. Then he keyed the ignition. The engine came alive, low controlled. Joe followed a second later. Far ahead, a small figure crossed under a flickering sign that read Sunrise Motel in red letters that buzzed and blinked like a warning nobody heeded. Jed eased out of the lot. Two bikes, no pack, no noise, keeping the gap wide enough to look harmless and close enough to matter. The Sunrise Motel looked like a place where hope came to sit down and never got back up. 12 doors lined up in a row like teeth with bad gaps between them. Curtains that were never quite closed, paint peeling in strips that curled away from the walls like the building itself was trying to leave. The ice machine groaned next to room 12, loud and broken, the kind of mechanical sound that becomes white noise until you realize it's the only sound there is. Jed rolled past, once kept his head forward, then turned into the side lane and parked behind a dumpster where the light was dead. Joe killed her engine beside him. They moved on foot. Colton was at his door trying to swipe a key card with fingers that shook from cold. The paper bag pressed to his chest. Red light. Click. Red again. His eyes darted across the lot, panic building. Joe stopped a few steps away and kept her hands low. Try it slower. Colton swallowed, swiped again. Green. He pushed the door open a crack. Warm, stale air leaked out, carrying the smell of medicine and sweat, and a space heater working too hard for too little. Mom, he called, voice small. I brought soup. Colton closed the door. The woman's voice was thin, sharp from exhaustion. The kind of voice that had been saying close the door for months and knew it never really closed. Colton hesitated. He looked back at Jed like he needed permission to breathe. Jed didn't step closer. Tell her you met us at the diner. Tell her you came back safe. Colton nodded and slipped inside. The door stayed partly open. Through the narrow gap, the room told its own story. One bedsheet's tangled, a heap of clothes on a chair, a small table wobbling under a stained lamp, medicine bottles on the sink all empty, and on the table next to where Colton set the soup, a folded paper with a clinic logo and a handwritten note in red ink. Pay by Friday. The door opened wider. She was young. That was the first thing. Mid-20s at most, but sickness had drawn years across her face like pencil marks that wouldn't erase. Flushed cheeks, glassy eyes, hair pulled into a knot that was more survival than style. One hand gripped the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright, and her knuckles were white around the wood. Lena Marrow looked at Jed's vest, at Joe's boots, at the motorcycles she could hear, but not see, and fear hit her face so fast it looked like a reflex. No, she breathed. Please, just leave. Jed kept his voice low. Ma'am, we're not looking for trouble. We're leaving. We just wanted the kid back safe. Her eyes didn't stay on him. They moved past, scanning the lot, not looking at the bikes, looking at the corners, the office door, the far end of the parking area where a patrol car might sit. Trouble finds this place, she said, and tried to close the door. Colton appeared behind her, clutching the paper bag. Mom, you need to eat. Lena's gaze dropped to the bag. Steam pushed through the paper. For 1 second, her face softened. The hard lines around her mouth loosened, and something that might have been hunger or might have been gratitude passed across her features like a cloud's shadow. Then it tightened again, like she remembered what kindness cost in this town. Put it on the table, she told him. As she shifted, Jed caught sight of her wrist. A hospital band, same as Colton's. White. Today's date, the same last name in the same black print. Marrow. And above the band, where her sleeve rode up for just a moment, something else. A bruise on her forearm, not fresh, yellowing at the edges. The kind that comes from fingers pressing too hard. She saw him see it. She pulled her sleeve down fast and gripped the frame tighter. You went to the hospital, Jed said. Not a question. I went, Lena said. Defensive. Immediate. They didn't keep me. You should be in bed, Joe said gently. I am in bed, Lena snapped, then swayed on her feet as if her body wanted to make her a liar. She caught herself on the frame breath, coming shallow and fast. We're fine. They weren't fine. The room was tight and brutal. A space heater aimed at nothing. The chair propped with a phone book. The television dark. The window smeared with condensation from inside like the room was sweating. And through it, all that smell. Fever and stale heat and medicine that wasn't working. A car tire crunched on gravel behind them. Joe turned first. Lena turned second, And when Lena turned, her shoulders went rigid like someone had pulled a wire through her spine and yanked. Deputy Wade Sutter's voice floated across the lot, easy, pleased, like he'd been waiting for exactly this picture. Well, well. His boots approached without hurry. Jed turned, hands open. Sutter stopped a few feet away, thumbs hooked in his belt, head tilted slightly to one side, studying the scene like a man appraising property. I told you not to follow the kid. We didn't follow, Jed replied. We're returning him to his mom. Sutter angled his body so he could see past Jed into the room. His eyes moved across the soup on the table, the empty medicine bottles, the woman gripping the doorframe like she was drowning upright. Lena, he said, suddenly gentle, like the gentleness was something he could put on and take off. You okay? Lena's throat worked. I'm fine. Sutter nodded like a teacher hearing the right answer from a student who knew better than to give the wrong one. Good, because I'm seeing strangers at your door and I'm thinking I might need to keep you safe. He took a step closer. His eyes slid past the soup to the pay-by-Friday notice, and something moved across his face that wasn't concern. It was inventory. He was checking what she had and what she owed, and filing both away in a place where he could use them later. Somebody feeding you, he said. Look at that. Lena's cheeks flushed darker, shame mixing with fear, mixing with the fever that was already burning through her like a fire nobody had put out. They were leaving, she forced. How generous, Sutter said. He looked at Colton in the doorway. Hey, buddy, come here a second. Colton froze. Lena's hand shot backward, not grabbing Colton, just hovering, a hand that wanted to pull her son inside and knew she wasn't allowed to. Colton, don't. Sutter's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened like a blade being turned in light. Didn't ask you, Lena. He extended his hand toward the doorway, palm up, inviting. Come on, let's talk. Colton stepped back instead, pressing deeper into the room. Sutter's fingers curled slowly into his palm. Then he dropped the hand and straightened. That's all right. I'll come to you. He started toward the doorway. Jed didn't touch him. He simply shifted one foot into the threshold, filling the space with his body like a wall you couldn't pass without making it obvious you were forcing your way through. Sutter stopped inches away. His nostrils flared once. Move. We're not inside, Jed said. We're leaving. You recording? Sutter's eyes went to Joe. Joe didn't blink. Why would I need to? Sutter's gaze returned to Jed. You want to play games? I can call this trespassing. Intimidation. I can call child services and make it a very long night. Behind them, Lena made a small sound, like she'd been hit in the stomach without anyone touching her. Please don't. Sutter turned his head slightly, voice soft as something expensive. Then answer me, Lena. Did you invite them here? Lena's eyes dropped. They just walked him back. There we go, Sutter said, satisfied. He tapped the door frame with two knuckles, casual proprietary like the building answered to him. Now you two leave and you don't come back. He reached a hand toward Lena. Not a grab, just two fingers landing on her forearm. The same forearm with the bruise. Lena flinched so hard her whole body shifted backward. Jed felt his spine lock. Every muscle in his back went tight enough to snap, but he stayed still. Still in watching and recording every detail with the part of his brain that knew details one fights that fists couldn't. Don't touch her, Jed said, quiet. Not a request. Sutter looked at him. Or what? Or you explain why a deputy is squeezing a sick woman's arm in front of witnesses. Sutter's eyes moved across the lot. A curtain twitched in a nearby room. The motel manager hovered by the office door, pretending not to see. Someone was always watching. Sutter knew it. He lifted his hand away from Lena's arm like he'd never put it there. See, he said, peaceful. He stepped back and adjusted the radio on his belt again, the same habitual gesture recalibrating. You heard me? Leave. Jed shifted his weight backwards slow, showing he wasn't escalating. Joe mirrored him. They backed down the walkway. Lena stayed in the doorway, eyes down, one hand tight around her own arm where the bruise was. Colton peeked out from behind her, fresh white body pressed close to his mother's leg. Halfway to the corner, Jed pulled his phone and dialed 911. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't hide it. He stared across the lot at Sutter's patrol car and spoke clearly. Sunrise Motel off Route 9, Room 12. Adult female, high fever, severe coughing, trouble breathing. She needs an ambulance. Now. The dispatcher asked questions. Jed gave answers. Name, age, condition. He raised his voice toward the door without shouting. "Ma'am, what's your name?" A pause. Then through the thin walls a ragged voice. "Lena." Last name a cough, wet and hard. "Marrow," Jed told the dispatcher. "Lena Marrow. She has a wristband from today. She left the ER. She's getting worse." Sutter materialized from behind his patrol car like he'd been listening to a frequency only he could hear. He walked toward Jed with that same easy stride badge catching the last of the daylight. "You calling 911? Jed didn't answer him. He spoke into the phone. "Deputy is approaching. I'm not interfering with his duties. I'm requesting medical help." Sutter came closer until he could hear the dispatcher's voice. "You can hang up," he said. "We've got it handled." Jed kept the phone at his ear. "No, we don't." Sutter's voice went flat. "End the call. Get on your bikes. Leave." "Sir," Jed told the dispatcher, "he's instructing me to cancel the ambulance." The dispatcher's voice carried through the phone, faint but clear. "This is emergency services. Do not obstruct the caller. EMS is en route." Something changed in Sutter's face, not the surface. The architecture. The thing holding the pleasant expression up buckled for one instant, and beneath it, Jed saw a man who was not used to being on record. Sutter reached out slowly for Jed's phone. Jed moved it away without jerking. "Don't touch me." "Relax." "I'm relaxed. Don't put your hands on a witness while a call is recorded." Behind them, curtains twitched in two more rooms. A phone screen glowed from a dark window. Somebody was filming. Sutter noticed the glow and straightened his posture for the audience, but his hand withdrew. The ambulance came 7 minutes later. It swung into the motel lot with lights washing the walls red and white. A second vehicle followed, smaller, a county unit. Two EMTs jumped out. The first, a woman with her hair pinned tight, moved fast and didn't slow down when Sutter stepped forward. "All good here," Sutter called. "False alarm. You can clear." The EMT didn't look at him. She looked at the doorway where Lena clung to the frame, swaying, skin-flushed, breath coming in short pulls that caught and rattled. "Ma'am, I need to assess you." Lena tried to straighten. "I'm fine." "Can you take a deep breath for me?" Lena tried. The inhale caught shallow and ugly and turned into a cough so hard she folded forward. Colton's hands grabbed her waist from behind, small fingers, trying to hold his mother upright, like he'd done it before, like he knew exactly where to stand. Sutter stepped closer to the EMT, voice low, meant only for her. "She doesn't have insurance. She'll refuse. Don't waste your time." The EMT turned to him with eyes that could cut steel. "Deputy, step back. You are not medical. I'm protecting her from a bill she can't pay." Jed spoke into his phone, still on the line. "EMS has arrived. Deputy is attempting to cancel care. I'm witnessing." Sutter's nostrils flared. The dispatcher's voice threaded through the phone again, and Sutter heard it, and the fact that everything he said was being recorded in two places at once made his jaw shift in a way his composure couldn't hide. The EMT moved past him and up the steps. She took Lena's temperature, checked her oxygen, listened to her lungs. And the longer she listened, the harder her face got. "This is not optional," the EMT said. "If you want to stay alive, you need to come in." Lena's eyes went wide, not at the words, at what going in meant. "Colton," she whispered to him, "I can't leave him." "I'll ride with you," the EMT said. "We can bring him." Sutter cut in smooth and fast. "No, the child stays with me." Colton's entire body went rigid. "No," he whispered, and the words sounded like he'd practiced saying it in his head 1,000 times and still hated how small it came out. Lena's hand trembled on the frame. "He stays with me." Sutter's voice stayed soft. "Lena, you're not thinking clearly. I can take him. You get treatment. He'll be safe." Jed didn't raise his voice. "The boy rides with his mom. That's normal." Sutter's eyes snapped to him. "You don't decide what's normal here." The EMT straightened up and pointed at her own radio. "I'll call a supervisor and CPS if I have to, but I am not leaving a 6-year-old separated from his primary caregiver in the middle of a medical crisis because someone with a badge wants control." "Watch your tone," Sutter said. "Watch your interference," she fired back. An older deputy arrived in the 2nd County unit. Tired eyes, a face that had lived through too many calls he wished he could forget. Deputy Carl Hobbs looked at the scene, took one breath, and said, "Sutter, what are you doing on handling a situation?" By blocking EMS, Hobbs looked at the EMT. "What's the status?" "Low oxygen, high fever, respiratory distress. She needs transport." Hobbs turned to Lena. He softened his voice, and the softness was real, not Sutter's version of it. "Ma'am, do you want medical care?" Lena's eyes moved from Sutter to Colton to Jed. She was choosing which danger was survivable. "I can't pay," she whispered. Hobbs nodded. "That's not your decision right now. That's paperwork for later. Right now is breathing." Lena's eyes filled. She gave the smallest nod. Sutter's composure cracked for one beat. Then Hobbs held up a hand and said, "Enough." And Lena said yes. And suddenly there were too many witnesses, too many recordings, too much light on a man who needed dark to work. The EMTs guided Lena out carefully. Colton moved with them, hands clutching the paper bag of cold soup against his chest like armor. "You can bring that," the EMD told him, as if it mattered, as if small comforts mattered when you were terrified. Then it happened. As the EMT helped Lena toward the ambulance, Colton stopped walking. He turned around and looked at the empty doorway of room 12, then at Sutter, then at Jed. And he said something that made every adult in the parking lot go still. "She shakes at night. She says, 'Don't tell Mike.'" Sutter's hands clenched at his sides for 1/2 second before he caught them and forced them open. His face didn't move, but his hands had already told the truth. Jed heard it. Joe heard it. Hobbs heard it. And in that sentence, in the way Colton said Mike with the same voice he used when Sutter told him to come here, Jed understood what no one had said out loud. There was no Mike. There was only a deputy who used a different name when he came to a motel room at night. A name a 6-year-old would know. A name a sick woman would whisper when she was too afraid to say the real one. Mike was Sutter. Sutter was Mike. And the man with the badge wasn't protecting Lena Marrow. He was keeping her. At the ambulance doors, Lena reached through the gap and caught Jed's wrist. Not a grip, a touch. Her fingers were hot with fever, trembling with exhaustion, and her voice was barely a sound at all. "Don't let him take my boy." 5 words. The first words she had spoken to anyone that weren't defense or denial, or the automatic lie of "I'm fine." She looked at Jed with eyes that had spent months being too afraid to ask for anything, and she asked for the only thing that mattered. It was the first choice she had made in longer than she could remember. Not a reaction, not compliance. A choice. She chose to trust a stranger because every familiar face in her life had given her a reason not to. The doors closed. The latch clicked, and the ambulance pulled out of the lot lights, strobing across the motel walls, carrying a woman who had just done the hardest thing she'd done in years. She had asked for help. 3 hours later, in the county hospital emergency room, a doctor pulled Jed aside and spoke in the quiet, careful voice that doctors use when the news isn't simple. "Lena Marrow came in with respiratory distress, severe pneumonia. We're running tests." He paused. "But there's something else." Jed waited. "Her blood work shows markers we don't usually see with pneumonia alone. Elevated liver enzymes, trace compounds that suggest prolonged, low-level toxic exposure." The doctor chose his next words like he was handling something sharp. "Someone may have been making her sick." Jed didn't move. The hallway around him seemed to narrow, the fluorescent lights pressing down the walls, pulling in. "Deliberately," Jed said. "Not a question." The doctor's mouth tightened. "We can't say that with certainty yet, but the pattern is consistent with someone introducing a substance into her food or drink over a period of weeks, maybe months. Her body's been fighting 2 things at once, the pneumonia and whatever's been weakening her system from the inside. Is she going to make it? We're working on it, but she's worse than she should be. Much worse." The doctor looked at Jed like he wanted to say more and couldn't. Then he pulled the curtain closed and went back to the work of keeping a woman alive who someone had been slowly trying to erase. Jed stood in the hallway with the fluorescent lights buzzing above him and the name Moreau sitting in his chest like a coal that wouldn't cool. Somewhere behind a curtained bay, Lena breathed through a machine. Somewhere in a social worker's office, Colton sat wrapped in a hospital blanket, holding a bag of soup that had gone cold hours ago, waiting for someone to tell him his mother was going to wake up. And somewhere out in the dark, Deputy Wade Sutter sat in his patrol car with his badge and his patients, watching the hospital entrance like a man who had all the time in the world. Joe leaned close enough that only Jed could hear her. "He's not going to stop." Jed's eyes stayed on the glass doors on the dark lot beyond, on the shape of a cruiser parked just close enough to be a reminder. Neither are we. The first thing Deputy Wade Sutter brought to the hospital wasn't a weapon. It was a folder. He walked through the automatic doors at 9:47 p.m., carrying it under his arm like a man bringing paperwork to a bank. Clean uniform, badge catching the lobby light. A younger deputy trailed 2 steps behind, eyes glued to Sutter's back like he was studying how authority moved through a room. The triage nurse looked up. Her posture changed the way posture always changed when Sutter entered a building. Not fear exactly, adjustment. The small recalibration people made when they knew someone could make their shift easy or impossible. Evening, deputy. Sutter didn't stop at the desk. He walked past it toward the corridor where the social worker's office sat behind a door with a narrow window and a plaque that read Miss Henson. He knocked twice casual like he was dropping off a birthday card. The door opened. Ms. Henson, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses, pushed up on her forehead, and a legal pad already full of notes, looked at Sutter and then past him to the younger deputy and then back to Sutter again. Behind her, visible through the gap, Colton sat in a plastic chair with a hospital blanket wrapped around his shoulders and the paper bag balanced on his knees. Deputy and Henson said, "How can I help you?" Sutter flipped the folder open. "Emergency protective custody," he said. Voice easy, confident, like the words were a key that fit every lock. "Signed and ready, I'm here to take the child." Henson's eyes moved across the page. Her lips parted, once closed, then parted again. "This isn't from juvenile court. It's from a magistrate." "That's not the same thing, deputy." Sutter tilted his head, patient. "Still a judge, Ms. Henson." Henson's gaze dropped to the signature line, then to the case number, then to the letterhead that looked official enough to fool someone who wasn't looking carefully. She was looking carefully. Jed stood in the corridor outside the office. He hadn't left the hallway since Colton had been placed there. Jo stood beside him, phone in her jacket pocket, her hand resting on it, the way a person rests a hand on something they might need fast. They didn't crowd the doorway. They didn't raise their voices. They stood where Colton could see them through the narrow window, and that was enough. "Let me see it," Jed said. Sutter didn't look at him. "You're not part of this." "We're witnesses," Jo said. Sutter's head turned slowly. "Witnesses to what? You buying soup?" He adjusted his belt, a habit that functioned like punctuation. "Cute," Henson's voice cut through. "Deputy, I need to verify this with the clerk's office before I release anyone. It's after hours. Then we wait until morning." Sutter leaned forward, not far, just enough to change the space between them. "Miss Henson, do you want to be the reason a child stays with an unstable mother in a biker gang, instead of going someplace safe?" He paused to let the words do their work. "Because that's how it'll be written." Inside the office, Colton pulled the blanket tighter. His eyes were locked on the back of Henson's head, like he was trying to will her not to move. Jed spoke to Henson, not to Sutter. "Ask for the nursing supervisor and the patient advocate, right now." Henson's face tightened. She nodded and turned toward the hallway, raising her voice. "I need Supervisor Reynolds and patient advocate on duty. Now, please." Sutter's fingers drummed once against the folder, then stopped. "You don't get to stall." Henson faced him again. "This paperwork doesn't match our requirements. This child is under hospital supervision until it does." 20 minutes passed like a held breath. Supervisor Reynolds arrived. Patient advocate Jacobs arrived. They examined the document. They called the clerk's office and reached a voicemail. They called again and reached nothing. The paper sat on the counter between them like an object no one wanted to touch, but everyone had to. "We cannot verify this tonight," Reynolds said. Sutter spread his hands. "Then you're holding a child against a court order." "We're protecting a child until we can confirm the order is real," Reynolds replied. And the distinction mattered, even if Sutter's face said it didn't. Sutter changed tactics the way water changes direction when it hits a wall. He didn't push harder at the hospital. He pushed outward. At 10:22 p.m., the sheriff's office Facebook page published a post. No names, no specifics, just enough. Deputy responding to report of suspicious group harassing a vulnerable mother and child at a local hospital. Situation being monitored. Please contact the sheriff's office with any information. By 10:43, strangers had walked into the lobby with phones raised like torches. By 11, a man in a work jacket was pointing at Jed's boots and telling a security guard that he'd seen the post and come to help. By 11:15, a teenager was filming the hallway entrance and shouting for someone to say something for the camera. Sutter didn't need to be in the building. He'd turned the building against itself. The lobby buzzed with anger that had no target and needed one. People who'd never met Lena Marrow or her son stood in the waiting room convinced they were protecting a child from a motorcycle gang because a deputy had told them so without telling them anything at all. Joe watched the crowd thicken. He's painting us as predators. Jed's face stayed flat. He's painting Colton as evidence. Through it all, Colton sat in Henson's office, blanket around his shoulders, soup bag on his lap, eyes moving to the door every time a voice rose in the hallway. "Is he coming back?" Colton whispered. Henson crouched beside him. "You're safe here, sweetheart." Colton shook his head. "He always comes back." At 11:31, the fire alarm chirped. Not the full building alarm, a single sharp beep from somewhere near the east wing, then a different tone from deeper in the building. A door alarm. Heads turned. Security guards split their attention, one moving toward the source, another staying near the lobby. The administrator pulled out his phone. Nurses looked at each other with the practiced confusion of people who couldn't tell a drill from a disaster. It lasted 9 seconds. 9 seconds of noise and movement, and everyone looking the wrong direction. Sutter came through the staff corridor. He didn't run. He walked with purpose through a door that should have been locked and moved down the hallway toward Henson's office, with the calm of a man following a route he had already mapped. His hand found Colton's shoulder before Henson could stand. Not a grab, pressure. The kind that looks gentle from across a room and feels like a cage up close. "Hey, buddy," Sutter said. Warm, easy. "Let's go. We got it worked out." Colton's face went white. Henson stood fast. "Deputy, the hospital has not released." "It's fine." Sutter was already turning, already guiding, already moving Colton toward the corridor that led not to the main lobby, but to the radiology wing where a side exit opened onto the staff parking lot. Away from cameras, away from the crowd he'd built as his own distraction. Colton looked back over his shoulder. Through the office doorway down the hall, his eyes found Jed. The look lasted less than 2 seconds, but it carried everything a 6-year-old couldn't say with words. Fear, betrayal, the specific terror of a child who'd been told he was safe and was learning again that safe was something adults promised and buildings couldn't keep. Jed moved, not running, walking fast with the controlled speed of a man who understood that running would turn the corner into a chase scene, and a chase scene was exactly the footage Sutter needed. Joe matched his pace. They reached the radiology corridor in time to see the back of Colton's blanket disappearing through a set of double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." "We can't go through that door," Joe said. Jed's jaw locked. "Then we go around." They cut through the main entrance and out into the cold. Boots on pavement. No helmets. No bikes, just 2 people moving across the parking lot toward the far side of the building where the staff exit spilled out near the dumpsters and the loading dock. Jed's eyes found the SUV first. A black county vehicle engine, ready running, pulling out of the staff exit lane with its headlights cutting through the dark. Sutter behind the wheel, and in the passenger seat, Colton's face pressed against the glass blanket, pulled up to his chin, eyes wide, and searching the parking lot. Jed was already raising his phone. The camera app opened. He zoomed in on the taillights just as the SUV passed under a street lamp. The plate came into focus for half a second. One clean image. He took it. Then Sutter raised one hand from the steering wheel, a casual wave through the windshield. The gesture of a man who just won a game no one else knew they were playing. The SUV turned onto the service road, taillights shrinking, and disappeared into traffic. Joe's breath came sharp. He took him. Jed lowered the phone. His voice was the flattest it had been all night. "Now we track smart. No hero moves, no mistakes." "How?" "Paper. We make him into paper." They went back inside, not to fight, to document. Jed walked straight to the triage desk and asked for Supervisor Reynolds, patient advocate Jacobs, and the hospital administrator by name. Names made people accountable. Titles let them hide. "I'm requesting preservation of all surveillance footage related to Deputy Sutter and the child," Jed said. "Staff corridors, radiology exit, Staff parking lot, every camera. Reynolds looked like she wanted to argue and couldn't find the ground. We're handling it. In writing, Joe said. She held her phone low, recording her own words and the response. Not in anyone's face. Just present. Just undeniable. We're requesting preservation right now. Jacobs arrived with his clipboard. Include that the deputy presented unverified custody documents, Joe said, and removed the child through a staff exit while the mother was sedated in ICU. Nobody contradicted her. Outside, Joe crouched by her bike and ran her hand along the rear brake line. She stopped. A thin, wet sheen glinted under the parking lot light where there shouldn't have been any. Not a full cut, a nick, just enough to make a line fail when the pressure was high. Mason, she said, catching herself on the wrong name. Jed. He came to her side and saw it. Sutter's people had touched their machines while they were inside the hospital, turning transportation into a trap. We don't ride, Jed said. Not tonight. They called Ruthie first. She was still at the diner apron on wiping a counter that was already clean. Did he take the boy? Ruthie asked before Jed could speak. Yes. Ruthie's face crumpled for half a second. I knew it. The sheriff's office already called me. Told me not to give footage to outsiders. Don't give it to us, Jed said. Just don't delete it. Back it up. Tell anyone who asks it's preserved for counsel. Ruthie stared at him. Counsel like lawyers. Exactly, Joe said. Ruthie nodded once. Okay. The motel manager talked through a crack in his office door with the chain still on. He confirmed Sutter had been at room 12. Confirmed Lena had flinched. Agreed to preserve lot camera footage. Then closed the door and killed the light. Back at the hospital before they left, Jed stopped at the coffee kiosk in the far corner of the lobby. He didn't want coffee. He wanted something he'd noticed 20 minutes earlier when a woman he'd never formally met paused by the sugar packets, slid something under the counter with 2 fingers and walked away without looking back. The same woman from the diner. Same stillness. Same unreadable face. Same movement that said she didn't want to be remembered. Jed picked up the card. No name on the front, just a seal in the corner, clean and sharp, the kind of printing that came from institutions, not copy shops. On the back, a phone number written in blue ink. Joe appeared beside him. Who is she? Jed turned the card once. Someone who's been watching longer than we have. At 12:47 a.m., Joe's phone rang. The voice on the other end was tired and low and belonged to Deputy Carl Hobbs. He's headed to Maple Ridge. Jed's eyes narrowed. What's Maple Ridge? Private property outside town, old hunting lodge. Sheriff's office uses it for retreats, off-the-books meetings, the kind of place where things happen without paperwork. How do you know? Because I've been told to drive there and I'm not going. Hobbs paused. And because the SUV you photographed is county fleet, that plate is registered to the admin pool. Not supposed to leave city limits without a sign out. You're sure? Yes. And I'm telling you so you don't ride in there because you won't ride out. We're not riding in. Good, Hobbs exhaled. State Police Duty Sergeant is working tonight. If anyone can move without the sheriff shutting it down, it's them. Another pause. And if you have someone above the sheriff, someone with the kind of signature that doesn't bend now, is when you call them. Why are you helping? Silence stretched across the line. Then Hobbs said quietly, because that kid's face didn't look like a kid getting picked up for ice cream. The call ended. Jed stood in the motel parking lot with the cold pressing against his face and the card pressing against his leg. He dialed the number. 1 ring. The voice answered immediate. Professional. No warmth and no impatience. Yes. He took the child. Hospital staff exit. County fleet SUV. We have the plate. He's heading to a property called Maple Ridge. A pause, then for the first time something shifted in the voice. Not panic. Anger controlled and deep, the kind that had been building for longer than one night. I know Maple Ridge. Joe leaned in. Then stop him. The voice ignored her and spoke to Jed like this was a procedure with steps that had to be followed in order. Go to the state police duty desk, not the sheriff. Tell them you are reporting unlawful removal of a minor from a hospital by a county deputy with unverified custody documentation. Provide the plate photo. Provide witness names. Tell them to contact my office. What office? You'll know in 5 minutes. An investigator will meet you at the state police barracks. The voice paused. Do not go to Maple Ridge. Do not attempt to retrieve the child yourself. He's 6 years old. And that's why you don't turn this into a scene that gives Sutter ammunition. Drive to the barracks, now. The line went dead. Brick drove a rental sedan off the highway lot. No logos, no roar, nothing that looked like a pack. At the state police barracks, the fluorescent lights were harsh and honest. A duty sergeant met them at the counter with a face that didn't care about patches or rumors. What's this about? Jed put his phone on the counter. The plate photo filled the screen. A child was removed from county hospital by Deputy Wade Sutter using unverified custody paperwork. Mother is sedated in ICU. The deputy exited through a staff corridor. Hospital staff have documented it. We're reporting it here. The sergeant stared at them. Then he nodded toward a side room. In here. They sat at a metal table. Jed gave facts, tempe locations, exact words where he could remember them. Joe gave names and sequences. Brick handed over a list of witnesses written on the back of a gas station receipt. Halfway through the door opened. A man in plain clothes stepped in, an ID badge clipped to his belt. Not sheriff's department, not hospital. He had the look of someone who lived in documents and decisions. Investigator Pratt, he said, County Circuit. Joe's eyes sharpened. Circuit Court. Pratt looked at Jed. You spoke with someone tonight, a woman who gave you a number. I spoke with a voice on a phone, Jed said. She didn't give a name. She wouldn't. Pratt sat down and opened a folder of his own. Real paper, real letterhead, not something printed in a panic. Give me everything you have. Jed slid his phone across the table. Plate photo, hallway video, the 911 audio, Ruthie's statement, the motel manager's confirmation, the hospital preservation request. Pratt studied the plate image. Fleet vehicle. Not signed out, the duty sergeant added. Maple Ridge, Joe said. Pratt's eyes flicked up. Don't say that name loudly. He looked at Jed. You did the right thing by not chasing. We don't care about being right, Jed said. We care about the kid. Pratt nodded once. Then he laid out what was coming. Emergency petition, child welfare review. Judicial directive to locate and return the minor to hospital custody pending investigation. My judge can sign tonight, Pratt said. At 2:17 a.m., the duty sergeant printed the directive and stamped it. Pratt signed where he was authorized. Then he left the room carrying the paper in his hand, and the building shifted into motion around them, like machinery engaging. The barracks clock read 2:41 when the sergeant came back with his jacket on. We roll in 20. Quiet. No sirens unless we have to. The door closed and the room got smaller. Jed sat at the metal table with his hands flat on the surface, palms down, fingers spread. The posture of a man forcing himself to be still when every nerve said move. Joe kept writing in her notebook. Times, names, details, like ink could keep the night from spinning. Brick spoke from the corner. Low. I could be there in 8 minutes. Jed didn't look at him. And then what? Then I take the kid. With what your hands, your pride. Jed's voice stayed flat. You walk into sheriff's property and take a child from a deputy, you give him the only thing he needs. A reason. Brick's jaw worked. He heard it. He hated it. But he heard it. The portable radio on the table crackled to life at 3:31. The duty sergeant's voice came through, clipped and controlled. We are on scene. Visual on county fleet SUV. 2 additional county units present. No lights. Joe's breath stopped. Approaching property line. Establishing perimeter. A pause. Static. Then contact. Subject identified as Deputy Wade Sutter. He is presenting paperwork. Pratt's voice cut through on a second channel. Do not accept verbal claims. Execute directive. Confirm minor's location. Another pause. Longer than the last. Then the words came through, plain and clear. We have visual on the minor through the front window. He appears unharmed, seated, blanket around shoulders. Jed closed his eyes. 1 second, then opened them. Sutter is refusing entry. State's property is under sheriff's jurisdiction. State directive supersedes. We are here for the minor. Static, a burst of noise. Sutter is stepping back. He is recording with his phone. He is stating this is unlawful. More static, and then the sentence that made Joe's hand stop writing and Brick stand without realizing it, and the fluorescent lights buzz louder as if even the building was listening. Minor is in our custody. Repeat. Minor is in our custody. Joe's eyes filled. She wiped them fast, angry at the wetness, angry at the relief, angry at the hours between a bowl of soup and a radio transmission that meant a boy was no longer in a room he shouldn't have been in. Transporting to barracks, CP and the SN route. Sutter is not detained at this time. Instructed not to contact the child or the mother. Then the radio added one more line almost buried in static. Additional note. Officers discovered a secondary room in the lodge. Locked. Contents appear to be files. Photographs. Personal documents. Multiple names. Requesting investigative unit. Joe looked at Jed. Jed stared at the radio like it had just opened a door into a room much larger than the one they were sitting in. Pratt's voice returned sharper now. Secure the lodge. Nobody enters that room without forensic protocol. Log everything. The radio went quiet. Joe leaned across the table. He's been doing this to others. Jed didn't answer. He didn't need to. The locked room at Maple Ridge had just turned a single night's crisis into something that had roots going back months, maybe years. And somewhere in those files were the names of women who had been chosen the same way Lena had been chosen. At 4:12 a.m., headlights cut across the barracks parking lot. A state unit pulled in, then another. A trooper opened the rear door, and Colton stepped out slowly, the hospital blanket still wrapped around him, dragging on the asphalt like it was too heavy for his body. His hair was messed. His face was pale. His eyes looked like they belonged to someone who had lived 40 years in 6. A woman in a plain coat walked beside him. CPS duty worker, Ms. Liard, badge visible, hands careful. Colton didn't run to Jed. He stood on the pavement and looked at Jed the way people look at something they want to believe in and are terrified to trust. Jed crouched, not close, not crowding, just low enough to meet the boy's eyes without making him look up. Hey, he said, you're safe. Colton's lip trembled. He forced words out like each one cost him something. He said you were going to jail. I'm right here. He said my mom doesn't want me. Joe made a sound behind Jed, small, involuntary. She caught it and held still. Jed felt something hot climb his chest and forced it down until it was just a voice. Steady, level, the calmest thing in the parking lot. He lied. That's what he does. Colton stared at him, searching, running some internal test that 6-year-olds should know how to run. Then he nodded once. Tiny, like signing a contract he couldn't read. The ride back to the hospital was quiet in the way that matters. Just a state unit in front of sedan behind, and the kind of silence that happens when everyone is afraid that one wrong word will crack the only thing holding together. At the hospital, the ICU nurse met them in the corridor. She's still sedated, vitals are steadier, 2 minutes at the glass. Colton walked to the window and pressed close without touching it. Through the glass, Lena lay still under white sheets. Tubes, tape, a machine breathing for her in a rhythm that sounded mechanical and merciless. Her hair was brushed back from her face and the bruising on her forearm was visible where the gown sleeve ended ugly against hospital white. Mom, Colton whispered. I'm here. No answer. Just the machine. I didn't leave. He took me. I came back. His voice cracked, but he kept going, pushing the words out like they were rope, and she was drowning. I'm going to be good. I'm going to listen. Just wake up. Jed stood at the end of the corridor, hands in his pockets, back to the wall, watching a boy talk to glass about promises he was too young to make and too brave to break. Then from inside the ICU, the monitors shifted rhythm. A nurse moved to the bedside. Lena's hand moved on the sheet, her fingers curled, her head turned on the pillow, and through the glass, through the tubes and tape, and the machine that breathed for her, her eyes opened. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Her gaze drifted toward the glass, unfocused, swimming, but moving in the right direction toward the sound of a voice she knew better than any other sound in the world. Colton pressed both palms flat against the window. I'm right here. And in the ICU, Lena Marrow's hand lifted 2 inches off the sheet and reached toward the window where her son stood. The Ivoline swayed. She couldn't reach him. She couldn't speak. But she showed him through glass and tubes and the wreckage of what had been done to her body that she was trying. The nurse adjusted something. A doctor appeared. Lena's eyes closed again, pulled back under by sedation and exhaustion, and a body fighting a war on two fronts. But she had opened them. She had reached. 5 days passed like a slow fever breaking. In the ICU, Lena Marrow fought her way back to the surface the way drowning people do not, in one smooth motion, but in ugly, exhausting surges that left her gasping and trembling, and then still again for hours. The doctors removed the breathing tube on day 2. She coughed for 20 minutes straight, a sound so raw, the nurses closed the doors to spare the hallway. On day 3, she sat up long enough to drink broth through a straw and ask where Colton was. On day 4, she ate solid food and asked the doctor a question no one expected. What made me sick? The doctor looked at her chart, then at her face. He explained the blood work carefully, the elevated liver enzymes, the trace compounds, the pattern that suggested prolonged exposure to something that shouldn't have been in her system. He used clinical language. She heard every word like a hammer blow. Someone was putting something in my water, Lena said. Not a question. The doctor didn't confirm it directly. He confirmed it with his silence and the way he couldn't hold her gaze. That night alone in the ICU, Lena did something the nurses didn't see on the monitors. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her bare feet touched the cold floor. Her arms trembled as she gripped into the rail. She pushed herself upright, spine screaming, lungs burning, and she stood. 11 seconds. Her knees buckled, and she caught the bed frame and lowered herself back down with a sound that was half breath and half fury. But she had stood. She had told her body to hold her upright, and her body had listened for 11 seconds after months of being too weak to try. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about every glass of water she'd drunk in that motel room. Every pill she'd swallowed from a bottle a man in a uniform brought to her door. Every night she'd shaken with fever, while a voice told her she needed him. On day 5, when Ms. Laird arrived for the morning check, Lena didn't ask about Colton. She didn't ask about the weather or the food or the machines. She looked at the CPS worker with eyes that had burned away everything soft and said 3 words. I want to testify. Laird looked at her for a long moment. Not surprised. Confirmed. Like she'd been waiting for those words the way a farmer waits for rain, knowing it would come but not knowing when. She left the room and made a phone call. Colton had spent those 5 days in a family room near the ICU under hospital supervision, a state trooper outside the door, Ms. Henson rotating shifts. He slept on the couch with the blanket pulled over his head. He ate what they brought without asking for anything. Twice a day they walked him to the ICU window, and he stood there with his palms on the glass and talked to his mother about things that didn't matter because the things that mattered were too heavy. He told her about the vending machine that took his quarter and didn't give it back. He told her about the nurse who let him draw with markers on paper towels. He told her the soup at the hospital wasn't as good as Ruthie's. Lena listened through the glass with eyes that got clearer every day. Outside the hospital, the machinery ground forward. Investigator Pratt filed a motion with the circuit court. State police secured Maple Ridge under forensic protocol and spent 3 days cataloging the contents of the locked room. Files, photographs, personal documents with names and addresses of women in the county, 4 in total, each one matching a pattern so specific it read like a manual. Single mothers, low income, isolated, no family nearby. The kind of women a deputy could visit without anyone asking why. One of the 4 names had no current address, no phone number, no record of contact in 11 months. Just a name on a folder and a photograph of a woman who looked like she had stopped expecting anyone to come looking. Diana Calloway delivered that information to Pratt on day 3, standing in the barracks hallway with a box of files she'd spent 14 months assembling on her own time. She was the court clerk for the county circuit, the sister of Judge Marin Calloway, and the woman who had left the card at the hospital coffee kiosk. She had noticed the gaps the way a carpenter notices a crooked beam. Small inconsistencies in the system. A protective order filed and then quietly withdrawn. A complaint logged and then reassigned to the deputy who was the subject of the complaint. I brought it to the sheriff 8 months ago, Diana told Pratt. He told me I was mistaken. Pratt looked at the box. And then my tires got slashed in the courthouse parking lot. Diana's face didn't change. So I stopped asking the sheriff and started building. On day 4, Deputy Wade Sutter was formally arrested at his residence on charges of unlawful removal of a minor falsification of court documents and misuse of county resources. He was calm when they cuffed him. He asked for a lawyer before the door closed, and the request came out smooth and practiced, like he'd rehearsed it in a mirror. Sheriff Lyle Greer held a press conference that afternoon. He stood behind a podium with the county seal and expressed his deep concern and his full cooperation and his absolute commitment to transparency. He did not mention Maple Ridge. He did not mention the locked room. He did not mention the 4 names. Jed watched the press conference on the television in the Hypatus cafeteria with a cup of coffee he didn't drink. Joe sat beside him, notebook closed. "He's going to walk behind Sutter like a shield," Joe said. "Distance himself just enough to survive." Jed didn't answer. He was thinking about day 5, about what Lena had said to Laird that morning, about 3 words that had set a courtroom into motion before the sun was fully up. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. On day 5, held in the county circuit corridor room because it was the only room with jurisdiction that didn't answer to Sheriff Greer. The courtroom was small, wood paneling gone dark with decades of polish and argument, a judge's bench elevated just enough to mean something. 2 tables, a gallery with 4 rows of benches that could hold maybe 40 people if they didn't mind pressing shoulders. They were full by 1:30. State troopers took positions at both doors, not because anyone expected violence, but because the county had spent 5 days fracturing along a line nobody knew existed until a 6-year-old walked into a diner with a handful of coins. On one side of that line were people who believed a deputy had been doing his job. On the other were people who had started asking questions that didn't have comfortable answers. Jed sat in the back row. No vest, no patches, a plain jacket over a plain shirt, and hands folded on his knees like a man in church. Joe sat beside him. Brick and Coyote took seats near the aisle spread apart, unremarkable. Ruthie sat 3 rows up still, wearing the look she'd had since the diner, the look of a woman who'd been pulled into something she couldn't walk away from. Deputy Carl Hobbs sat alone near the back corner. He didn't look at anyone. He looked at the floor like it held answers he was still deciding whether to give. At 1:55, the side door opened, and Wade Sutter was escorted in. Orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front. His lawyer walked beside him, a man from 2 counties over with a briefcase that cost more than the motel room where this had started. Sutter sat at the defense table and rested his cuffed hands in his lap, thumbs hooked together, still as a man who believed stillness was the same as control. His face carried no expression at all. The mask he'd worn for 2 years was gone. Not hidden. Retired. Like he'd decided it was no longer the right tool for this room. At 1:58, Sheriff Greer entered through the main doors and took a seat in the front row of the gallery. He nodded to the bailiff. He adjusted his jacket. He looked straight ahead like a man performing attendance. At 2 o'clock, the bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Maren Calloway entered from chambers. She was not what the room expected. Small, mid-60s, gray hair cut short and practical, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She moved to the bench without ceremony, sat and opened a folder that was already thick with 5 days of filings. She didn't scan the gallery. She didn't acknowledge Greer. She looked at the folder, then at Sutter, then at the prosecutor, and spoke. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the custody and welfare of a minor child and related charges against Deputy Wade Sutter. We are also addressing preliminary findings from an ongoing investigation into the defendant's conduct over a period of approximately 2 years. She paused. "Is the state ready?" "Ready, Your Honor." Defense Sutter's lawyer stood. "Ready, Your Honor. And we'd like to note for the record that my client's rights have been..." "Noted," Judge Calloway said. "Sit down." The prosecutor, a woman named Marsh from the state attorney's office, outlined the case in the flat, methodical language of someone who understood that facts were more powerful than adjectives. The removal of a minor from a hospital using unverified documents. The falsified magistrate order. The county fleet vehicle used without authorization. The property at Maple Ridge. The locked room. The files. She did not mention Lena Merrow yet. She was saving that. Sutter's lawyer objected 4 times in the first 15 minutes. Judge Calloway overruled 3 and sustained 1, and each time her voice carried the same even weight. Investigator Pratt took the stand and presented the evidence chain. the plate photo taken by a civilian witness. The hospital surveillance showing Sutter entering through the staff corridor during the fire alarm. The radiology exit footage showing the child being walked to the SUV. The county fleet log showing no sign-out. The forensic catalog from Maple Ridge. 4 folders, 4 women, 1 missing. Sutter's lawyer objected to the Maple Ridge evidence as outside the scope. Judge Calloway looked at him over her reading glasses. Deputy Sutter is charged with removing a child using fabricated legal authority. The question of whether this is an isolated incident or part of a pattern is directly relevant to the court's determination of danger. Overruled. At 2:45, the prosecutor called her next witness. The state calls Lena Marrow. The courtroom shifted, heads turned toward the side door. Sutter's hands resting in his lap pressed together harder. His lawyer leaned toward him and whispered. Sutter didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the door. It opened. Lena came through it slowly, and the slowness was not weakness. It was the specific, deliberate pace of a woman who had decided to walk into a room she was terrified of and was not going to let her body's shaking change her mind. She wore a hospital gown under a borrowed jacket. Her hair was pulled back. An IV port was still taped to the back of her hand, capped but visible. She was pale. She was thin. Her cheeks still carried the ghost of the fever that had nearly killed her. And she walked to the witness stand without looking at Sutter, without looking at the gallery, without looking at anything except the chair where she was going to sit and the microphone where she was going to speak. She had stood for 11 seconds in the dark 4 nights ago. She had told her body to hold her. Now she was asking it to carry her across a courtroom, and it was listening. The bailiff swore her in. She sat. Her hands gripped the edge of the witness box, and her knuckles were white, and she didn't hide them. Prosecutor Marsh approached, and, Ms. Marrow, can you tell the court your relationship with the defendant? Lena's eyes moved to Sutter for the first time. He sat 12 feet away in orange. No expression. Just a man watching a woman he'd kept in a motel room decide what to do with the truth. Lena's voice came out thin, but it came out. He started coming to the motel about 2 years ago, after my husband died. She swallowed. He said he was checking on us, welfare visits. He said it was his job. And was it? No. Lena's jaw tightened. Nobody sent him. He just came. How often? At first once a week, then more, then almost every night. Did he identify himself as Deputy Sutter? Lena's hands gripped harder. He told me to call him Mike. He said it was easier. He said his real name would make people ask questions. A murmur moved through the gallery. Judge Calloway didn't need to quiet it. It quieted itself. What happened during these visits? Lena closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, they were harder. Not tearful, hard. The hardness of a woman who had been practicing this moment in a hospital bed for 3 days and was not going to waste it. He brought things at first, food, medicine, diapers for Colton when he was younger. He made himself necessary. She paused. Then he made himself unavoidable. Can you explain what you mean? He told me the motel manager reported to him that if I talked to anyone he'd know, he told me child services would take Colton if I couldn't prove I was stable. Lena's voice dropped but didn't break. He told me I needed him, and then he made it true. How did he make it true? Lena looked at the judge, not at the prosecutor, at Judge Calloway, as if the next words were meant for the one person in the room who had the power to make them matter. He put something in my water. I don't know what. I don't know when it started. I just know I kept getting sicker, and he kept showing up with medicine that didn't work, and doctors I couldn't afford, and bills that made me need him more. Her voice shook once. She steadied it. He made me weak, so I couldn't leave. He made me sick, so I couldn't fight. And he made me afraid, so I couldn't talk. Sutter's lawyer stood. Objection, speculation. The witness is not a medical professional and cannot. The hospital's toxicology report is entered as Exhibit 14, Marsh said, without turning around. It confirms the presence of compounds consistent with prolonged low-level poisoning. Sit down. Judge Calloway nodded. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Marrow. Lena continued. Not fast, not slow. At the pace of someone who had spent 2 years swallowing words and was now letting them out one at a time, each one a brick in a wall she was building between her son and the man who had tried to own them both. She described the bruises, how Sutter gripped her arm when she asked questions he didn't like, how he locked the motel room door from outside when he left, not every time, but enough times that Colton learned to check. How he told Colton to be good, and good meant quiet, and quiet meant invisible. She described the hospital, how Sutter told her to leave before they ran more tests, how he said the bill would ruin her, how he drove her back to the motel himself and stopped at a pharmacy on the way and bought her medicine she now understood was not medicine at all. She described the night Colton walked to the diner, how she'd been too sick to stand, how she'd given him the coins because she had nothing else to give, how she'd heard him leave and couldn't follow and lay in that bed listening to the ice machine groan outside the door and waited for either her son to come back or the world to end because she couldn't tell the difference anymore. The courtroom was silent, not the polite silence of procedure, the heavy silence of people hearing something they could not unhear. Marsh asked one more question. Ms. Marrow, did you ever ask for help? Lena's chin lifted, not budge an inch, but the inch mattered. I'm asking now. Marsh nodded and turned to the judge. No further questions. Sutter's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He buttoned his jacket. He approached the witness stand with the careful posture of a man who knew the room was against him and was looking for a crack he could widen. Ms. Marrow, isn't it true that Deputy Sutter provided you with food shelter assistance and medical care over a period of 2 years? He provided what he chose, Lena said, and took what he wanted. Isn't it true that you never filed a complaint, never called a hotline, never told a single person mine? Lena looked at him. Her eyes didn't waver. He was the law. Who was I supposed to call? The lawyer opened his mouth to follow up, and Judge Calloway spoke from the bench. Counselor, the witness has answered the question. Move on or sit down. He sat down. Judge Calloway removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench. She looked at Sutter for a long moment, then at the gallery, then at Lena, who sat in the witness chair with her hands still gripping the edge and her hospital gown visible under the borrowed jacket and an IV port on the back of her hand that said she had walked out of a medical ward to be here. Ms. Marrow, the judge said, you may step down. Lena stood. She let go of the witness box, and for the first time since she'd entered the courtroom, she looked directly at Wade Sutter. He sat 12 feet away in his orange jumpsuit with his hands in his lap and his face empty. No charm, no performance, just a man being looked at by a woman he had spent 2 years making sure couldn't look at anyone. Lena held his gaze. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The looking was enough. The standing was enough. The fact that she was upright in a room full of people after months of being kept horizontal in a room with no one was enough. Then she turned and walked back to the side door, and the courtroom watched her go, and nobody made a sound until the door closed behind her. Judge Calloway let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. Then she spoke. Based on the evidence presented, the testimony of the witness, the investigative findings from the state police, and the documented pattern of conduct extending over approximately 2 years, this court finds sufficient grounds for the following. She listed them without inflection. Continued detention without bail. Full protective order for Lena and Colton Marrow. Permanent no-contact directive. Referral to the State Attorney General for additional charges. Formal investigation into the Sheriff Department's handling of prior complaints. She looked at Sutter one last time. Deputy Sutter, you used your badge to isolate a woman, poison her body, control her child, and fabricate legal documents when she was too sick to stop you. She paused. This court is not confused about what you are. Sutter's lawyer started to stand. Sutter put a hand on his arm, a small motion, the gesture of a man who finally understood that the machinery he'd built was not going to carry him out of this room. The bailiff led him away through the side door. Sheriff Greer rose from his seat in the front row. He straightened his jacket. He walked toward the exit with the measured pace of a man trying to look unaffected. Judge Calloway's voice caught him 3 steps from the door. Sheriff Greer. He stopped. He turned. His face was composed. Your department will produce all records related to Deputy Sutter's activities, including any complaints filed and subsequently withdrawn or reassigned. You have 72 hours. She held his gaze. If any records are missing, altered, or destroyed, I will treat it as obstruction, and I will enjoy the paperwork. Greer's jaw flexed once. He nodded. He left. The courtroom emptied slowly. Ruthie was one of the first to stand. She walked past Jed's row without stopping, but her hand brushed his shoulder as she passed. Not a pat, not a squeeze, just contact. Acknowledgement that something had happened and they had both been in the room when it did. Deputy Hobbs left last. He stood at the gallery door for a moment, looking back at the empty bench where the judge had sat, and his face carried the exhausted relief of a man who had been carrying a secret for too long and had finally watched someone else say it out loud. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Lena sat on a wooden bench with her back against the wall and her eyes closed. The borrowed jacket hung loose on her shoulders. Her hands rested on her lap, palms up like she'd finally let go of something she'd been gripping for years. Ms. Laird sat beside her, quiet, present, not asking questions. Jed approached from the far end of the hallway. His boots were loud on the tile, and Lena opened her eyes before he reached her. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him through the motel doorway, measuring threat and safety and the distance between them. But something had changed. The fear was still there. It might always be there, but it was smaller now, pressed down under something harder and more durable. The look of a woman who had just sat in a witness chair and said every word she'd swallowed for 2 years and was still breathing. "Colton's asking for you," Jed said. Lena nodded. She stood slowly, not because she was weak, because she was careful with her body, now aware of it, in a way she hadn't been when someone else was deciding what it could and couldn't do. "Thank you," she said. Jed shook his head once. "You did that, in there. That was you." Lena looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said something quiet, almost to herself. "He told me I was nothing. Every night. Different words, same meaning." She paused. "I believed it. I don't anymore." She straightened her spine. She pulled the jacket tighter around her shoulders. And she walked down the hallway toward the room where her son was waiting, and her steps were steady, and she didn't look back. Jed watched her go. Joe appeared beside him. "Judge Calloway wants to see you." He found the judge in a small conference room off the main corridor. She was sitting at a table with her reading glasses back on, signing documents. Diana Calloway stood near the window, arms folded. Judge Calloway looked up when Jed entered. She didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She studied him the way she'd studied evidence all afternoon. "Sit down," she said. Jed sat. "You kept your people in line," she said. "You didn't chase. You didn't break into Maple Ridge. You didn't touch Sutter. You built a paper trail instead of a crime scene." She paused. "That's not what people expect from your kind of vest." Jed didn't react to the phrase. "We're not what people expect." Calloway nodded once. "Lena is going to need a safe plan, not a hero plan. Housing, medical coverage, protective order enforcement, the kind of structure that keeps working after the headlines stop." "The club can cover the hospital," Jed said. "Money helps," Calloway said, "but money doesn't fix control. Control is what we're cutting out." She looked at him over her glasses. "Can you do structure long-term without making it about you?" Jed held her gaze. "Tell me what you need and I'll do it clean." Calloway watched him for one more second. Then she slid a card across the table. Her own, with a direct number. "If Greer retaliates," she said, "and he will, you call me." Jed took the card and put it in his pocket beside the one that had started everything. He stood to leave. At the door, Judge Calloway spoke again. "Her husband wrote to me before he died." Jed stopped. "He said if anything happened to him, she'd have no one. He asked me to watch for her." Calloway's voice didn't soften, but it slowed. "The letter arrived 3 weeks after he was gone. By the time I started looking, she'd already disappeared. Moved towns, changed names, running from something I didn't understand yet." Jed turned. "Sutter found her before you did." "Yes," Calloway removed her glasses. "I failed her for 2 years. Diana didn't. Diana kept looking when I'd stopped. And then a boy walked into a diner with $1.37, and the rest of it fell into place." She paused. "I don't believe in fate, but I believe in what happens when enough people refuse to look away." Jed nodded once. He left the room and walked down the corridor toward the hospital exit, where 41 motorcycles were parked in the cold afternoon sun. The next morning broke gray and thin over Harlan Falls, the kind of morning that didn't promise anything and didn't take anything away. Lena walked through the front door of Ruthie's Diner at 8:15 with Colton beside her. She was moving under her own power, slow but certain, one hand resting on her son's shoulder. Not leaning on him, just touching, just knowing he was there. Ruthie looked up from behind the counter. Her hands stopped moving. The rag she'd been using went still. "Hey, baby," she said, and she wasn't talking to Colton. Lena almost smiled. The muscles tried. They didn't quite get there, but they tried, and that was more than they'd done in months. Colton walked to the counter. He climbed onto a stool the same side of the diner where the long table had been, where 41 strangers had gone quiet because a child asked if coins could buy soup. He reached into his hoodie pocket, the one with the broken zipper held shut with a safety pin, and pulled out a small pile of coins. He counted them on the counter, carefully, deliberately, the way he'd counted them 6 days ago when the answer mattered more than the math. $1.37. Ruthie watched him count. Her eyes filled. She didn't wipe them this time. "For you?" she asked. Colton shook his head. He pushed the coins across the counter toward her with both hands, the same hands that had clutched a bag of soup through a hospital and a hunting lodge in the back seat of a state police cruiser. "For the next kid," he said. Ruthie stared at the coins, then at Colton, then at Lena, who stood behind her son with one hand still on his shoulder and eyes that were clear for the first time in longer than she could remember. Ruthie picked up the coins and put them in a glass jar next to the register. She wrote on a piece of masking tape in black marker and stuck it to the glass. "Soup Fund, $1.37. Outside, the motorcycles started one at a time. Not roaring, rolling. A low, steady thunder that shook the diner windows the way it had 6 days ago, but softer now, like the sound knew it was leaving and wanted to be remembered gently. Jed sat on his bike at the edge of the lot, engine running, helmet in his hand. He looked through the diner window and saw Lena standing behind Colton with her back straight and her hand on his shoulder and her face turned toward the glass. She saw him. He didn't wave. She didn't wave. They just looked at each other through a diner window on a gray Kentucky morning. Two people who had met because a child counted coins and a man couldn't look away. And between them there was nothing that needed to be said because everything that mattered had already been done. Jed put on his helmet, he kicked the stand, he eased out of the lot and onto Route 9, and the others followed 41 engines in a line chrome catching the first pale light, heading west toward whatever the road held next. Behind them, the diner got smaller. The motel sign buzzed and flickered in the distance. The hospital sat on the hill like a concrete promise that worked better now than it had a week ago. And inside Ruthie's diner, a glass jar sat on the counter next to the register with $1.37 inside it and a piece of tape that said Soup Fund. Colton sat on his stool and drank a cup of chicken noodle that Ruthie refused to let him pay for. Lena sat beside him close enough to touch drinking coffee with both hands, wrapped around the mug like she was holding on to heat she'd been missing for a very long time. The bell above the door was quiet. The grill was warm. And somewhere on Route 9 heading west, the sound of engines faded until it was just the road in the morning and the ordinary silence of a town that had learned in the space of 6 days that the difference between looking away and looking closer was a bowl of soup and a handful of coins and a boy brave enough to ask if it was enough.